Are you or anyone else you know interested in buying or selling a home? How about saving the planet? Climate Change Realty is the only company operating in all 50 states that allows you to create thousands of dollars in donations absolutely for free. Yes, that's right. Our service and your donations are free. Climate Change Realty can connect you with one of the best real estate agents in your city. And because of that connection, a full 25% of your real estate agent's commissions will be donated to a 501c3 nonprofit organization of your choice. Real estate agents earn between 2 to 3% of the final sales price when they help you buy or sell a home. That's at least $500 donated for every $100,000 worth of real estate sold when you find your real estate agent with Climate Change Realty. Visit www.ccrboulder.com today and click Find an Agent to help us transform the real estate market into a battery for the regenerative economy. Welcome to the podcast. Leesa, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to this episode.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to talk to you.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you because we get to have a little fun. We're kind of mixing fiction into the real world, but that's kind of like my favorite type of thing. But before we kind of dive into what exactly you're doing, I'd love to get a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to be doing what you're doing at the current moment.
Yeah, so no direct route for sure. I spent my first 10 years after college doing nonprofit theater management and acting and directing, and then I went to work for Wild Oats. So I spent 8 years doing marketing for natural and organic foods and groceries back, before people really understood what organic was. Yes, I'm that old. And then I wanted to get back into nonprofit sustainability work. And so I was hired to be the first executive director for the U.S. Green Building Council here in Georgia, and did that for a number of years. And we had lifted up a program called High Performance Healthy Schools with a very conservative Republican governor, Casey Cagle, who was really incredibly supportive of getting schools to upgrade their energy and their water mechanics in order to really reduce their usage. And this was during the economic downturn, 2008, 2009, through 12. And so I was running that program throughout the state. And, I was working for the U.S. Green Building Council. So, obviously our membership, we're doing commercial building and residential building and all of that, all to LEED standards. But I found that I was more and more excited by the work that was happening in the schools and with the young people. And I grew up with a mom who was an elementary school teacher and then principal, and my younger brother was was a high school history teacher, and then a principal, and then a superintendent. So lots of education in my sphere, and then the opportunity at Captain Planet came available, and I thought, oh my gosh, if I could spend all of my time working with young people and helping them really accelerate their passion for engaging in change making, that would just be the greatest job ever. And so I've been doing it for 10 years now, and it is in fact the greatest job ever.
Yeah, I'm jealous. How long were you working in theater management?
10 years. Yeah, my whole 20s.
Yeah, and what kind of drew you to that work initially? I don't usually talk to people who do that kind of stuff. I'm really curious.
Yeah, well, I wanted to be an actor, and then very quickly realized that there were many much more talented people than me, and that was maybe not my path. And so I found that very early on, like I think by the time I was 22, I realized I was really adept at fundraising and putting together programs that would help companies meet their sort of CSR goals way back in the day, when their CSR was really more around community building and arts investment and stuff like that. And so I just got it. I understood how to do it. I understood how to put those packages together. And so I just sort of migrated into the management side and ended up running a theater company that I was an early company member of called Actors Express in Atlanta, Georgia. Actually, the original artistic director, Chris Coleman, now runs the Denver Theater Center, I believe. So
Oh,
he's like
cool.
right there in your neck of the woods, doing great work in Denver.
Totally. It seems to me like a really stressful job if you're like in charge of like this live performance or like putting on like a television show or something. It seems like you're like behind the scenes like pulling all the strings to make sure if like one thing messes up you have to run over to the other side. Was it kind of like that for like a decade of doing that?
Yeah, yeah, but it was also like so deeply creative, and I was in my 20s, so I had a ton of energy, and I was fine on 4 hours of sleep, and so being able
Oh jeez.
to do that level of work that early in my life, gave me opportunities to learn. Like, I think nonprofit work for people in their 20s, you're given opportunities to do uh, tasks and create strategies, and like nobody in their right mind would have like let a 25-year-old run a company, but like you're in nonprofit theater, like of course they're gonna, if you're game to do it, and you're willing to do it for that salary. So I was able to learn a lot of management and development skills, that I would have not learned in the for-profit sector at that age.
Gotcha. Well, I'm clearly not in the right mind because I'm about to turn 25 and I'm letting myself run the company. So I appreciate that. And when did the what like kind of switched in your mind that made you decide to begin working in nonprofit work after that?
So that was nonprofit work, and then I went into the
Oh,
for-profit sector, actually, which for me
oh,
was,
the
again, it was
O's.
about expanding my skill building. So going and working, for Wild Oats, they were $1 billion company, and it taught me a lot about uh, proper record keeping and like financial structures and reporting, and again, like all of the things that, like, as a nonprofit leader, when you start that young, nobody's teaching you that stuff, and if you didn't study business in school, like, that's not really something that you know about. And so it really helped accelerate, I think, my learning, and build my skills. And it was fun to be on the other side where I was giving money away on behalf of a company to community-based organizations that were doing great work. So I did that for 8 years with Wild Oats, and then decided to go back into the nonprofit space, taking those
Oh, I
skills
see.
with me. Mm-hmm.
Specifically, then getting into focusing on green building for a while.
Yeah, yeah. It was really, I wanted to do something that was more broadly sustainable than just the food justice side, the natural and organic, and sort of, this was way before regenerative agriculture. It was early days in the food growth movement. And so yeah, so I wanted to do something that was, more broad. And then when I started working with schools and young people, and I was like, oh, this is the thing. This is like
Hmm.
being able to really support a generational transformation, and support a generation's desire to transform the systems of our world, was is just, it's
Super
mind
meaningful.
blowing to me, and it's really, I find immense, powerful potential in that.
Okay, cool. All right. I got a feel for it. I like it. So who's Captain Planet?
Yeah. So Captain Planet was a superhero that was created in the 1990s, and it was the idea of Ted Turner, who started CNN, and Turner Broadcasting Systems, and he had, was really the the sort of grandfather of cable, and all of what it's become. And so, and he also started the UN Foundation, and so he early on was able to really marry like intense philanthropy and intense conservation work, with business. And so Captain Planet was created because there was all of these cartoons that were out there, and Ted Turner was like, we need a superhero for the planet is what we need. And so he entrusted that vision to his executive producer, who was in charge of Turner Environment Programs at the time, named a woman named Barbara Pyle. And I think, like, she really sort of set the idea of a superhero on its ear. I mean, traditionally, when written, I think, by white men, predominantly superheroes have always been sort of these sort of savior figures who, a single white male who sort of appears and sorts stuff out. And being a woman, she was like, no, I don't really, that's not really my jam. And so she wrote a mythology that was really about having young people from 5 different continents around the world who were strengthened by the elements of the earth. And when they saw something in the environment or in the social fabric that needed fixing, or that was causing harm, they would combine their powers and they would fix that thing. And the power of that collaboration created the superhero who was Captain Planet. And so, like, just that idea of that mythology, it's so lovely, and it really awakens the imagination about the potential of collaboration and community, and the power of young people. And the characters actually were all based on young environmental activists that she had met through her work with UN around the world. So it's kind of cool, and that's a little unknown fact about that.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit deeper meaning behind that show than like Bugs Bunny, like trying to hide from the guy. What is it? Elmer Fudd is, I think, is that the guy that would hunt him, and then the Roadrunner and the Roadrunner and the Dynamite. That's like that era as well, right?
It is that era, and it's interesting because Captain Planet, the Planeteers, they made 113 original episodes, which is just unheard of for.
Wow.
I think there's only like 16 Roadrunner episodes that were ever made, like, which is funny for me because. Yes, like I grew up watching it, and I always thought I was watching different episodes, but we were just watching the same episodes over and over again. Like, which I guess is why Wile E. Coyote always, got hit by the Acme anvil, because it was like the same episode over and over again, pretty much.
Yeah. Or the one where he like the Roadrunner like runs through the mountain. He like paints like a hole, like a tunnel in the mountain, and then he runs in it. Yeah, a little bit, yeah. I mean, just mindless entertainment versus kind of trying to inspire some sort of heart and soul in the youth, which I'm always down for. So what's the story behind the foundation? How did that get started?
Yeah, so they started. So the first episodes aired in 1990, and then like kids activated. They just were like, oh, well, then I'm going to save the earth. Like, they really were excited by the show. It became the #1 Saturday morning cartoon. Like, they just got it. And so they all activated. And so these teachers started reaching out to Turner Broadcasting System, and we're like, what are we supposed to do with all these activated children? Like, you've got them all like fired up. Like, we're not sure what we're supposed to do with them now. And so Barbara Pyle again figured out a way to take a portion of the distribution proceeds, and they started to make, obviously, like, Captain Planet backpacks and Captain Planet lunch boxes and all of the the things that come along with a top hit in for kids. And so they took also some portion of those residuals, and all of that was directed into a foundation, and that foundation began to provide small grants to educators so they could actually do a project with their activated students. So imagine like a classroom, they get all excited, and they look around and they figure out, like, well, what needs fixing where we are? And they're like, oh my gosh, we don't have any pollinator plants on our schoolyard. Like, we need to plant for the bees and the butterflies. And so they would apply for a small grant, and that would allow them to buy, the materials that they needed to execute that project. That was basically the way that the small grants worked. So it was across the board. I mean, you had classrooms who were doing riparian restoration for streams and rivers. You had them doing tree planting. We had them doing garden installations. They were doing water quality testing and advocating for policy changes around, clean water. And so really dynamic and interesting. And over the course of 20 years doing the small grants, the foundation directly invested in over 1 million kids in their projects. And then right before I came on board, the board of directors wanted to start operating some best practice programs, because they're like, for 20 years we've been giving out grants and we have all this information about, what kinds of projects young people are wanting to do. There's got to be some ways to do them, the best possible way, from, learning from from the grantees that we've had. And so we started building programs in 2012, and so a decade later, we have 4 operating programs that are persistent now.
Love it. Well, I hope you can get more. Now, like when you talk about getting out or like funding projects where people are either gardening or doing repairing and restoration, I think that's really awesome. That's like the kind of essential information or essential education that that kids will really remember for a lifetime. As you're talking about this, I'm trying to think back to when I was in school and when I would go out and do something interesting like that. And the only thing I can remember is when we were in 7th grade. I grew up in a very like mountain town. We had beautiful lakes and hiking trails. And like the only day of 7th grade science class that I remember is that we all like there was literally a hike. There literally the Martin J. Ryerson School, which was 6th to 8th grade, was right on the state park. So we could actually walk around the fence and enter the state park. And I remember she took our whole class up maybe like a half a mile into the woods, and we were all running through the mud and stuff. And then we had like nets and we were like looking at crayfish and stuff. And I still think back to that one day of science class was my favorite day of the whole year. So I'm really a big fan of having more like education programs or curriculum like that. I think it's so meaningful to get kids connected to the environment. So when the foundation has this idea of bringing this mythology of Captain Planet to life, I love this idea of people from all across the globe wanting to advocate for environmental stewardship and then coming together and creating this superhero, because that's what really collaboration is. It's when a bunch of people get together. They can not just do, if there's 5 people, they can't just do 5 times as much work. They could do 100 times as much work, I believe, when 5 people get together. So when you're thinking about this idea, when you're doing the work at the foundation, what does it exactly mean to bring this mythology to life?
So, I mean, in its current incarnation, it really has a lot of direct action work. Meaning, so again, for really for the first 25 years. So even after I joined and we started building um, operating programs, those programs were still facilitated through K-12 and then through also informal educators, meaning like there might be nature centers or boys and girls clubs or scout troops that would also use the programs that we had developed. So we have a program called Project Learning Garden that puts gardens into schools. It importantly teaches young people how to grow food and how food actually comes to their plate, which a lot of young people don't understand at all. Most
Mm-hmm.
young people think that it just magically appears in a plastic bag, which is just sort of horrific. Um, and it's important just from a life skills standpoint, but it also lets them take ideas that they learned in the classroom and put them to practice in the world that they inhabit, right? Because you learn about science and natural systems, but unless you see how those actually play out in the real world, it's hard to really understand them conceptually, like really deeply in the body. And so we love Project Learning Garden for that reason. And it's in close to almost 700 schools now, elementary schools across the country. And so I think 26 states we're in now. And that's
Wow.
exciting. That's a lot of young people who have access to that program on a regular basis. If you figure, most schools have about 700 students or so, you're sort of creeping up on 500,000 kids every year that have access to that. So that's a great program. We have another program called Project Hero that really is about helping connect kids to understanding about endangered and threatened species and helping catalyze the natural empathy that they have when they learn about that. When kids learn that like things are dying and that it's really human based decisions that are causing that, they're like, oh, what? Well, what are we going to do about that? And there really just hasn't been anything for teachers to be able to turn to, and so they've often had to just say, well, it's a problem. Let's like make a poster about our favorite endangered species, or let's write a letter to a legislator, which, those are decent actions, but we would argue that a better action, something that doesn't really sort of encourage apathy, that really catalyzes empathy into action, would be to learn about what right in your own community is threatened and endangered, and then create a project to aid that. So to do a habitat restoration or a planting or some sort of activity that will support those locally threatened and endangered species. And so that's what Project Hero is. And it's basically, it lets young people go on a quest. It's all web based, and then they come off screen and go out just like you did in seventh grade. They go out into the woods and actually begin to put their ideas into practice to help endangered species. What we found more recently, really since 2016, was when Gen Z just came sort of knocking on our door, and they said, we want to be taught directly. We want to activate and do more direct action campaigns that are not facilitated necessarily through adults, because we're sort of angry at adults. We don't think they're doing enough. We don't think they're doing it fast enough. We don't think they're taking this seriously enough. And so we're going to change things. And it's interesting because I think I was talking to somebody the other day who was like, well, what about the millennials? I'm like, well, the millennials were into it. Like, they got it, but they weren't necessarily as active as Gen Z is. And she was like, oh, it was like that John Mayer song, Waiting on the World to Change. I'm like, kinda.
I was just listening to that before the podcast.
Yeah. It's like, kinda like, the millennials have been really great about raising awareness and being vocal about it. But Gen Z is like, they are putting their time and bodies on the line in order to really implement campaigns where you can see really tangible shifts in policies and systems. And that's sort of where their head is, really around the climate crisis and around the ocean plastics crisis. Like, those are the two things that have really lit them up. And so in 2016, we started doing these direct trainings with Gen Z and now Gen Alpha. And they are extraordinarily effective change makers. And so we have, over the last several years, trained about 2,500 young people from 90 countries, and they have gone about implementing campaigns at various levels of success and with a lot of collaboration and a lot of amplification of each other.
Well, I'll tell you this, I can definitely attest to that because I'm actually the first year of Gen Z. And first off, it's hard to broadly generalize people into generations. Everyone's different. Everyone has different passions. But I totally get what you're saying because I started my business by knocking doors in Boulder. So that means that a lot of all the college kids I met were younger than me. So they're all in the same generation as me, but they're younger. And every time they hear climate change realty, they're like, whoa, that's really, really cool. Like, that's so awesome. I can't believe you're doing that. Like, thanks for knocking on the door. And then they don't have any money to sell a house, so they can't actually help with the business. Well, but they can help with the movement, because there's more than just the real estate business. It's all these different industries coalescing and coming together. And I think that's really, really cool. But yeah, I'm still hung up on this. Like I really did not like school. And I'm thinking back to this day in seventh grade, and it like makes me like really happy and excited. So I just wish there was more stuff like that in the education system. If you think back to before we even had the education system, what we used to do is just go out and hunt and gather and spend all our time out in nature. And that's kind of what we did. What do you think the role is of these, I would say, like the K to 12 students, like people before they get to college where they still can't kind of go out and start a business or do something? What role do you think they have to play in this, whether we're talking about environmental stewardship or removing plastic from the ocean? It's so interesting that you bring those two up as issues that Gen Z is concerned about, because like, that's like me, like literally I'm like, my business is all about removing CO2 from the atmosphere, decarbonizing the economy. And then I also insist on including plastic pollution in that as well, because it's killing all of the life in the ocean and we're consuming it. But yeah, so as far as people who aren't like of the adult age, like the 5 to 17-year-olds, what role do you think they have to play in this movement?
Oh, it's enormous. I mean, they're really effective. I'll give one example. So there was a young girl named Chloe May Espinosa who had, like a lot of her peers, had seen the video of the turtle with the straw in its nose and had just lost their minds about it. And so she started a small organization where she lived in Orange County, California, called Skip the Plastic Straw. And she basically had been raising awareness with her peers, and they had all made personal pledges, not to use plastic straws any longer. And but she came to a training that we did. We In 2018, we co-founded a program called Ocean Heroes Boot Camp with an organization called Lonely Whale. And the first training that we did was in New Orleans at the aquarium. They were kind enough to host us in 2018. And Chloe May was one of the young people who came. We had about 130, I think, young people who showed up for that very first training. And it was 3 days. And we really, we brought peer activists or peer change makers to cross train with their with the attendees, and we tried to remove adults as much as possible from that because again, like what we have
More
noticed is
fun.
that Gen Z, they're more interested in learning from each other right now and really sort of doing creative collaborative thinking with each other to redesign the world that they want to inhabit and that they think the world should be. And adults, we get in the way because we're like, well, that probably won't work, or well, that's a cool idea, but maybe it's not doable. And like Gen Z's like, oh, hush it, like just hush, you had your chance. And
I was literally thinking that as you're saying that. I mean, I don't. Nobody. Not that they're wrong, but when someone when a bright-eyed person has an idea about what they want to do, you should never be like, "That's probably not going to work." You should you should provide affirmation, and then criticism's fine, but you don't start with being like, I don't know about that. I hate people who do that.
Yeah. And it's pretty common. I mean, I think for a lot of people you've been on the planet for a while, they're like, oh, well, we've seen people try that and it hasn't worked before. And I think they're trying to be helpful, but it's not helpful, to your point. So, we do try to bring young people to cross train with each other. But in any case, the things that we really try to emphasize is like, how do policies get made, and how do you, as a young person, even as a non-voter, engage in policy creation and transformation? How does supply and demand work within supply chains and within corporate purchasing behaviors? And then how do you really communicate the science and the facts of the issues so that you can be an effective change maker with your peers and with your community? And so we were teaching about supply and demand, and this really, like Chloe May, she was just like, oh, okay, well, that makes complete sense to me. And so she went back. She was 11 years old at the time. She went back to her school district nutrition director, who was in charge of all the purchasing, and within 10 days had gotten a commitment for the removal of plastic straws from all of the schools across her school district, and then immediately turned to the neighboring 2 school districts in Orange County, Southern California. Those are very large school districts. Got them to agree to remove plastics from their purchasing line items. Went to a giant medical center, got them to remove it, and then over the next couple of years, removed it from, I believe she ended up 7 school districts and a giant medical center. And it was just the first year alone, we could see that she had pulled like 5 million straws out of circulation. And, I was talking to her and I was like, Chloe May, okay, so I know a lot of adults and a lot of adult-led NGOs that have been trying for years to get purchasing changes at the school district level. Like, what did you do? And she's like, well, I talked about cost avoidance like y'all taught me. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, if I'm a purchasing director at a school district and an 11-year-old starts talking to me about cost avoidance, like I am sure enough doing what they say, because I don't know how to have that conversation with an 11-year-old, And I was like, see, it really is about helping them understand the bits of the system and how you use the language of the system to transform it. And so that really, I think for us was like, ooh, light bulb moment. And so we do that more and more and more as often as possible.
That's a huge light bulb moment. I mean, the idea that 11-year-old is teaching, I guess I'm not sure if it's a business, how it works with the way that the school systems are picking what products they should purchase for the students. But she's like, hey, this system could be a little bit better. And she's 11-year-old, and she if she makes sense, it's like, whoa, it's kind of hard to deny. One thing I wanted to bring up, yeah, I mean, that's an amazing story, and thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm always trying to encourage, I think my audience, actually I have data on my audience, is primarily like 18 to like 34, mostly like that my age demographic. And I'm always trying to encourage people who are listening to be like, hey, you can go out and you can make an impact with your voice, whether you're starting a venture or you're talking to your representative or you're going out and you're doing things. It really can make an impact. I never even thought to bring it down even lower. And this idea that a younger person, well, she obviously is in that school system, so I think that that is a factor as well, could have an impact. And you're saying that like NGOs and stuff were trying to do that and they couldn't do it, and it's just this one girl like that.
What was
Fine
really
for how
funny
long?
was by the end of the year, the Orange County Register had called her one of the 100 most powerful people in Orange County, which I just loved.
I
I
love
was like,
that.
that is so awesome. And, she has continued her work. She continues to do her work. But, for us, we had seen a lot of young people activate and want to do this work. But what we had noticed was that from the point of activation to them actually being able to successfully implement change was a really long period of time. And we knew that we were losing a lot of really talented change makers because they were hitting brick walls, or they weren't able to overcome some of the obstacles, and they were, choosing to put their energy into other things, which makes complete sense. But we knew, like, generationally, that the impulse has been systems change, broadly, even when we talk about, justice, and we talk about, environmental and social justice, and, those sort of, big capital S systems that need transforming. And so, because we could see the generational impulse, we wanted to figure out if we could help unlock what it is that lets them be successful early enough that they can stay with that, and really have, the numbers finally on the side of transformation. You know what I mean? Because otherwise, I think you still have those couple young people who stick with it, and you hear about them, but it feels like they're just, super unique or something. Do you know what I mean? And it's just the impulse and the desire is so strong across the generation. And so how do we, as quickly as possible, train and scale across the generation so that the system has no choice but to transform, because its future stakeholders are saying unequivocally that they will not accept it any longer, and that they will not participate in it.
Yeah. I don't think the uniqueness is in the desire or the desire to want to go out and improve things. I think uniqueness simply comes from something that anyone can control. You can become a unique change maker just by taking action. I think it's that simple. It's not about how intelligent you are or what your background is. It's just about your willingness to actually go out and do something, because most people are in their routines and just continue on. If you want to see change, you have to make it. And the only way to do that is to just try to do something. And I can't kind of overemphasize that point too much, because I've just seen it over and over and over again, that you can really, even if you just impact one person, it can be really, really meaningful to see how your choices affect someone else positively, or, an entire ecological biosphere, depending on that. The straw example is interesting. It's not, it's not like the biggest issue in the world. And then, of course, we're talking about California, but imagine if she was in, I don't know which states are known for being less environmentally friendly, but maybe if she wasn't in California and she got a group of 10 of her friends to go and talk to someone, maybe that would have more of an impact as well. I'm wondering how that might work elsewhere. But one thing I did want to bring up is I wanted to give a shout out to Vance Martin, who's the president of the Wild Foundation. He was on the show a couple months ago, and one of his quotes is like, if someone tells you that what you're trying to do is impossible, then you're on the right track. I loved that, and that was relating to what we were what we were talking about before. But so in regards to taking action, what do you see as the main reason why these young folks are actually signing up for your trainings to begin with?
Well, I think that that they're seeing climate trends, like they have access to an incredible amount of information and data that I mean, they're carrying a computer around in their pocket.
Sure.
That computer is giving them information that most generations before them did not have,
Oh,
have.
they're as smart as me, I think.
They
They
have
have
an
all the same
incredible amount of
information.
information. It's about what do they do with that and how can they put that information to work, right? And so that's what the training helps them do. They see that the change needs to happen. They can see it, like I said, we've trained people from 90 different nations. So I think about, the young people on Cayman, on the islands, who were able to stop a new cruise ship port from being um, created. The deal had already been done, but between their government and the cruise ship line, it was going to displace and destroy the better part of their barrier reef right off of Grand Cayman. And um, and the government was telling them, oh, well, we're going to transplant corals and it's going to be fine. And so the community wasn't really responding. And these young people started looking at the science behind that. And they were like, well, that's just a crock. Like, that's not going to happen. Those corals aren't going to take, they're not going to transplant. And the number that they're suggesting transplanting it's it's not even a drop in the bucket of what's going to be destroyed. And then they really started sort of doing the math in their heads about like how many people's livelihoods were going to get impacted and what that really was going to do for the tourism and the beauty and also the resiliency of their island, where they already are starting to see sea level rising. And here you want to take out one of the barrier reefs that is, helping to mitigate that. And so they ran a counter education campaign across the island. They taught the populace what the government wasn't telling them. That caused a judge to require a referendum vote on the deal that the government, again, had already struck with this cruise company. And it was voted down. And they had to undo the deal and start over. And, so when we talk, and those were 16 and 17-year-olds. And so when we talk about the power of these young change makers to do things at, national scale, like they do have that capacity and they do have that desire. And I think that, for those of us who have the ability to support, train, invest in, and amplify the work that they're doing in order to really create these transformations across systems so that we have the opportunity for a climate friendly future. We have the opportunity for a livable future, not just for humans, which now, that starts to become a question mark. But for so many species that we share this space with, I think that young people, they get that. They're hearing it, they're seeing it, and they 100% believe it's truth. And they don't want to be apathetic about it. They just don't have, it's their future. Like they're looking at the, it's their future, and they are determined to alter the course. And so that's just where we're at.
Sure.
Yeah. It's their future. It's our future. We're all descendants of Mother Earth. Gotta love it. So at these trainings, are you specifically teaching more like action points and strategies, or do you also teach the issues as well, or do they kind of come pre-educated on that topic?
Well, they come definitely passionate about something that they want to shift. The Planeteer Alliance purposefully tries to provide enough breadth that if what you are passionate about is mangrove restoration, then there's something for you. If you are passionate about renewable energy, transforming to a renewable energy future, there's something for you there. But at the bottom of it, it's really about like, corporate and supply chain behaviors, policies that, that require change, and then also peer and community influencing and awareness raising. So where we maybe provide education about issues is really more around the science and where to find the data to support the things that you're passionate about, and then how to best communicate that science in a way that people can hear it so that they understand what it is that you're trying to do. Um, but we don't do, I mean, we don't need to teach them what the issues are. They already know that stuff, and they're already coming with a pretty good idea of what they want to change. They just need support in designing those campaigns and then implementing and amplifying those campaigns.
Delightful. So when you mentioned the Planeteer Alliance, is that a separate program? Is that a newer program that the
It
foundation is
is.
working
So
on?
it's basically an evolution or an outgrowth. So we left Ocean Heroes with Lonely Whale towards the middle of last year, and evolved into the Planeteer Alliance in order to really grow the breadth of what we could address. What we found were that, the Ocean Heroes work was really very focused and appropriately so on the ocean plastics crisis. A lot of the young people who we were training who were being successful there were already pivoting to broader climate change stuff, closing down coal power fire plants, and implementing renewable energy requirements, and trying to transition fleets to electric, and all kinds of other things. We have a whole group that is really passionate about sharks and stopping the shark finning and just the sort of callous killing of sharks, because we have this sort of very similar to what's happening out west with wolves. Like, humans, we just have an issue with apex predators. And I was talking to the Mike Phillips, who was the biologist who reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone. And he's like, I don't know that we can call anything an apex predator anymore, Leesa, if we're not talking about a human, because we are the most apex and the cruelest of all the predators. And I was like, yeah, that's actually a pretty fair point, Mike. So yeah, so I mean, humans have an issue with apex predators. And so there are a lot of young people who are really passionate about supporting those particular species, and changing the narrative around them so that we don't eradicate them completely and unnecessarily destroy their beauty and their presence on this planet. Frankly, I mean, talk about disruptive behaviors. Like, you take out the apex predator and you have really crashed an ecosystem. And so yeah, so they come, they come with the stuff that they're passionate about, and we try to help them at that point.
I get that. Yeah. One of the things I find very, I don't even have a word for it. I'll say interesting, is that there is this really mainstream rigid focus on CO2 emissions and climate change. But it would appear to me that the biodiversity crisis is accelerating and is kind of at a worse existential level than the climate crisis is at this point. And there, I'm always trying to figure out ways to use the economic machine to create environmental stewardship, and it's really tricky with biodiversity loss because people in economics only care about making money for other people. So it's a tricky thing that I'm consistently thinking about. And when you talk about this example of a ship liner trying to build a new port and killing off more corals, I spent a year in Australia and I was really excited to go see the reef, the Great Barrier Reef, and it's dead. It's just all white bleached from the ocean acidification levels. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how we can kind of create more emphasis on biodiversity loss and ocean health rather than just this rigid climate change focus that we seem to hear in the mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, it is, the biodiversity loss. We're in the middle of, they're saying, the sixth great extinction, right? So, and
Absolutely.
this is
I think
the
it's
first time
inevitable.
that it's human caused, right? So before it was not, we weren't doing it, but this time we 100% are. And a lot of that has to do, I think, um, with sort of old fashioned development systems, um, for the way that we create and maintain communities and cities and housing structures. There are a lot of old zoning requirements on books that are the antithesis of smart planning and smart growth. Um, where you've got builders who are trying to do um, smaller domiciles on smaller plots of land so that you have better density and less impact on environment. But the zoning requirements in those particular towns are like, you have to have a lot of this size and you can only have one residence on that lot. And so it requires the destruction of habitat and the destruction of agricultural lands. It's advancing all of the things that need to not be happening any longer because we know better. But undoing those zoning rules and trying to get communities um, to think in a different way, like it's going to require young people teaching that up. Do you know what I mean? It's going to require them saying to their parents and their grandparents, do not fight this, this new zoning ordinance, because it's what needs to happen. Because parents and grandparents, they generally are worried about, like, oh, well, my land values are going to get destroyed, or my home value is going to get destroyed. And it's just not the case. I mean, there's no data to support that. It's really just displaced economic fear, honestly. And so if we don't change the way that those systems are operating, the biodiversity crisis it's not going to go backwards. Like, we're not going to be able to get our arms around it. And that's just one example in a very sort of Western perspective. In other countries, in developing countries, it's how do we help them, or how do we not help them develop in a way that is similar to ours, because it's the wrong direction. Like, we've already seen that. So please don't develop the way that we did. But it's hard not to, because what they see is big homes, that feel like they are more secure, like they are more desirable. Do you know what I mean? And so it's just it's a tricky question, that one.
They all are. I get the gist that your organization kind of lets the kids find their passion, and then you kind of give them the tools to kind of, I don't want to say exacerbate it, or kind of try and continue to increase advocacy on a specific issue. And that's similar to what I decided to do in my business, is to allow the clients to choose their own nonprofit, whether they want to focus on specific carbon drawdown or legislation or more market-based solutions. I think it's great to empower people to really feel like they're doing what they want to do, whether it's just a broad bucket of climate change or environmental stewardship, whatever it may be. As far as, what are your personal thoughts on climate action versus like reducing the waste stream? I just wanted to throw this in at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think what the young people are teaching us is that everything is connected, and that that we have to stop treating those things as mutually exclusive, sort of siloed issues, and which has been the tradition of the NGO communities historically. It's like, oh, well, here's this group, and this is what we're working on, and then here's this group, and then here's what this is working on, right? And meanwhile, everything is interconnected, and for the most part, if I if I blow too hard, then you're going to feel that wind across the room. And so what the young people, what we're noticing with the work is, particularly within Planeteer Alliance, but more broadly, is like they really don't want to silo that stuff out. What they want is to get to the bottom of the systems, the issues that are systems level, and then let a transformation of those systems address and inform all of those things that need to be addressed, and not try to address them at each individual item.
Yeah. I mean, that's really tough because what I found is when you get deep enough, you get to the existential nature of human greed and selfishness, which is a problem that people have been trying to solve since the beginning of time. But hey, what you never know when there's going to be a Newton or an Einstein who comes around and cracks a code that can get us a little bit further down the lane. It's been really great having you on the show, Leesa. I really appreciate your time. What do you think? What can parents kind of do to support the work that their kids are interested in?
Encourage and support them. Like, do get them involved in programs where they can advance that work, get them connected to other young people who are doing that kind of work. We actually do have sort of support groups within the Planeteer Alliance for the parents themselves, because, it's to have an activated young person who's dealing with issues that can cause a lot of mental stress, and sometimes depression to some degree if they don't see that they're able to move the needle. What we have found in the life of the organization at Captain Planet Foundation is that young people understanding their agency to change the world that they're living in is the antidote to climate anxiety and depression, because they're not just. Do you know what I mean? And so we really try to encourage parents to help. Yeah, to help them engage that agency and train that themselves to be more successful agents of change, so they can get out of that cycle. And so that's what I would say to parents is encourage them and engage them more deeply in that work.
Yeah, no, I've said this on the show multiple times. When I first started by talking to climate scientists, and then I started talking to people who were doing work on the ground, and then continuing to build my business. There was a moment where I learned a lot about the issue and the fundamental science behind it, and got really anxious. And then I just kept pushing forward, and then got to the point where now I'm more optimistic than I ever have been. When you can tell that there's millions of people doing work, and you can be one of them, and you can create a huge impact. So, well, Leesa, I want to thank you for leading this work. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the podcast. I really appreciate what you're doing at the foundation. And just any final pieces of advice for more like young professionals, or like, just graduated college type folks who are really passionate about building a better world?
Yes, I think they should follow your incredible example, and they should figure out how they can make their business part of the solution, and make their work part of the solution. I remember when I was working for U.S. Green Building Council, and there was all of this funding that had been put into green jobs training, and a workforce development person from one of the big counties in Georgia called me and said, "We have all this money for green jobs training." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure." And they were like, "What's a green job?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness. Well, ideally all jobs are green jobs. Like that's really, what we need to do is teach people, what are the ways that they can, in any work that you are doing, um, be part of a climate resistant and a renewable energy future." And everybody, if everybody would just make that part of the work that they're doing the way that you are, then this problem will be gone in a generation. But everybody has the opportunity, and everybody should take that opportunity. And I want to commend you again. I think it's just extraordinary what you have conceived and begun to implement and model. So it's really great.
Yeah, thank you. And I fundamentally agree with you. And when you talk about integrating it into your business, it can also be integrating it into your company. You can be the sustainability person at a large corporation or the small insurance firm that you work with. You can be that person, and you can really fundamentally move the way the organization operates, and probably meet other people who are not saying anything, that are believe what you believe as well. And you just can't go wrong, in my opinion. But yeah, Leesa, thank you so much for the time. It's been absolutely delightful having you on the podcast. It's great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon, I hope.
You got it. Absolutely. All right, everybody. And we'll see you on the next one. So if you or anyone else you know is looking to buy or sell a home anywhere in the USA and would like to create thousands of dollars in donations without any cost out of pocket, please visit ccrealty.org today.